Hello, everyone. I'm Ken Blackburn, and welcome to Upfront. Today, we're going to examine a subject of significant importance to our West Coast, that of fish farms and their impacts on the environment, and in particular, on wild salmon populations. With me today are three BC activists, Richard Hagensen, Chair of the Council of Canadians Campbell River Chapter, Homolko First Nations elected Chief Darren Blaney, and filmmaker Scott Renyard, who, as the founder of Green Channel, also created the 2014 film The Pristine Coast. All three are concerned with open net fish farms, and all three were involved in Scott's film that detailed the 2010 protests on Vancouver Island, led by First Nations, biologist Alexandra Morton, and other groups who are strongly oppose open net fish farms on our coast. So let's start out, gentlemen, with each of you telling us a little more about your past, your activism, and a brief commentary on your involvement in Scott's film. And actually, Scott, let's start with you, as you're the filmmaker.
Oh, thanks, and thanks for having me on the show. The Pristine Coast was a film that actually began for me when I was a sport fisherman on the Vedder River a few years prior to when I got involved with the project. I was noticing that a lot of silver bright salmon were floating upside down dead in the river, and I was quite angry at the time, thinking that it was sport fishermen mishandling the fish. And shortly after that, I heard of a report from Alexandra Morton, and she noticed that pink and chum salmon were being impacted by fish farms. So I gave her a call because she actually appeared in another film that I did prior to that on a baby killer whale that was also from the Campbell River area. That title was Who Killed Miracle. When I found out that it was impacting wild salmon in that area, I asked her, do you think that this could actually be impacting wild salmon stocks as far south as in the Fraser? And at the time, she thought that it could, and that's what began my journey in looking at this issue. Shortly after that, when I was on the get out migration with her, we shared a photograph of a herring that was also bleeding from the fins. And that sort of kicked in the science training that I had from the University of British Columbia. And I decided that, and I sort of thought at the time that maybe this was impacting not just wild salmon, but maybe it was impacting other species. And then basically the film took a whole different turn, and I started to look at all finfish species, and it actually grew into an analysis of the impacts of aquaculture in basically the northern hemisphere of the planet.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Darren, over to you. Just tell us a little bit about your past as we get started here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm the chief of Homolko First Nations, and I started hearing about the farmed salmon years ago, before I was elected chief first in 2002. I served 2 terms, and at that time we were dealing with the fish farm in front of my community in Church House. And the fish farm there, within its first cycle of growing out salmon, was had killed off all our clam beaches surrounding Church House. And our people chose Church House because of the resources that were there. So the destruction to the clam beaches, to the even the kelp beds disappeared after the fish farms arrived there. So we took the province to court and got an injunction, but they didn't tell us that they had already put the Atlantic salmon in 2 weeks before the province notified us. That's when the province had jurisdiction on the fish farms. So on December 16th, before our office closed, we got this fax from the province saying that they had approved the Atlantics to go into Church House. Meanwhile, they had put it in early December. And then we won our injunction, and then that the province had not consulted us properly, because we were asking for all kinds of information on the impacts of farmed salmon. we had in writing all our requests for information. We weren't given them before their decision. Our concerns weren't addressed. And through the Cohen Commission, we found out there was diseases there that we weren't informed of during our consultation. We went through a 2-year consultation process, and they never informed us of some of these diseases that were out there. Just as within this round of consultation that we went through, there's the study from the Pacific Salmon Foundation about pathogens with DFO staff, senior staff informed the fish farms, but they never brought it to our consultation process.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that further on, Darren. I just want to let Richard have a chance to introduce himself as well.
Thanks for having me on the show. And I was born and raised in Campbell River, and I'm a retired social worker. Actually worked in the local pulp mill too, and was a tree planter in the Campbell River area many years ago. And I'm the chair of the local Council of Canadians, which is one of 50 chapters that across Canada with 100,000 members. It's a grassroots organization that has various campaigns, including keeping water safe and public health, and against frack gas, and basically demanding from our governments meaningful action on climate change, such as the Green New Deal, and putting environmental and social concerns ahead of corporate interests. Over the last 20 years, we have attended and spoken at local marches and rallies organized by First Nations and environmental organizations to protect BC's wild salmon and get open net fish farms out of the water onto land. We have also worked locally with other local environmental organizations like Campbell River Environmental Committee and the Sierra Club. And we now have a renewed campaign involving multiple chapters supporting actions against getting open net fish farms out of the water. And in terms of the Pristine Coast film, our connection was I set the PA system up at Spirit Square in 2010 for the film, and I wrote along with my partner Joanne Get Out Migration Song, which we sang on the film. We met Scott Renyard there. He wanted us to re-record the song, and we co-wrote other songs for the film, including the theme song for the Pristine Coast at a later date.
Great. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Okay, let's get into some of the things that especially Darren raised here. So the Cohen Commission report to the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans, DFO, in 2012 stated that if by September 30th, 2020, there is even a minimal risk of serious harm to migration salmon posed by open net fish farms must be removed from the coastal waters of BC. Well, September 30 has come and gone, and DFO continues to maintain that their science proves that open net fish farms poses no risk to wild salmon. At the same time, many First Nations, independent scientists, environmental organizations, commercial sports fishing organizations, ecotourism businesses, fishing lodges, and on, state that the harmful effects of fish farms along migratory routes present problems such as sea lice, PRV, and other pathogens, that these are a major reason that wild salmon are at risk. So tell me about your comments on DFO's position and why you are so personally opposed to having open net fish farms in the coastal waters. Richard, I'll go back to you to start on this, and then we'll go over to Scott and Darren.
Thank you. Before answering those two questions, I just wanted to briefly mention some past and future provincial and federal deadlines set to get open net fish farms out of the waters and similar moves in other countries. In 2018, following the occupation of open net fish farms in Broughton Archipelago by First Nations and allies, the BC government, they signed an agreement with the affected First Nations for an orderly transition of 17 of those open net fish farms out of the water by 2022. in 2019, during the election, Prime Minister Trudeau promised to phase out open net fish farms on the West Coast by 2025. Also, I'll mention that Alaska has banned open net fish farms from their coastal waters, and Washington State has already or is in the process of closing down their existing open net fish farms. In Norway itself, no open net fish farms are allowed anywhere near waters where migrating salmon are passing through. So anyways, the independent scientists and like biologist Alexander Morton and DFO scientists have proven that the high concentration of sea lice, piscine orthovirus or PRV, Tenasebacillum, I'm not sure the pronunciation of viruses, and other pathogens and biocides, effluents, antibiotics associated with the open net fish farms is harmful to the rapidly decreasing populations of wild salmon now migrating through those waters, and also harmful to sea lice and or sea life and humans, causing pollution to and raising acidity around the local waters. So fish farm companies, they continue to bring smolts into their fish farms infected with sea lice and PRV and other viruses, and there has been accidents at open net fish farms involving Atlantic salmon escaping into our coastal waters. The DFO has and is ignoring this evidence, not adequately monitoring the wild salmon in our BC waters, not adequately monitoring the fish farms in compliance with regulations designed to protect the health of wild salmon. And despite the deadlines for open net fish farm closures set by both levels of government, they continue to protect and promote the continued expansion of salmon farms, removing any incentive for the fish farm companies to meet the standards to protect wild salmon.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, that was very well said, Rich, and summarized a lot of the history of what's happened with the interaction between government and fish farms. I was given permission to film the Cohen inquiry, and I filmed 119 days of the 130 days of hearings over a one-year period. And I've posted all of that footage on the Green Channel under the title Exhibit 2148. So anybody can go back and see the testimony. And I created two films from all of that footage. And the one film, Trial of Iconic Species, looks at the science basically that was presented at the inquiry. And it was pretty clear that there was lots of evidence that the viruses were being spread, and they were being carried by the wild fish populations that were interacting with the farms, so that it's not just a very local infection or impact. It actually ends up covering the full range of the wild populations. So when a wild sockeye population goes up into the north, they carry with them the pathogens that they got infected with from the farms. And it's pretty clear that the vector is the sea lice. Sea lice will carry the bacteria and viruses from fish to fish. And so when you have these concentrations of fish in one little spot, you're going to amplify those diseases, and then those diseases are going to spill out into the environment and then be spread quite far from the actual infection site. And I made the contention in the film that if you have even just one farm, one open net farm, you're going to have that infection spread. And when you have multiple farms, all that changes is the speed at which the diseases are spread. So the aquaculture industry has known about these issues, and they've known for many, many years. And in Europe, they've studied it to death. There's lots of science articles that are written about this. The thing that's sort of perplexing to me is why they haven't evolved into a different mode. They've had lots of time to change their practice, and they've chosen not to. Now, I guess it's probably cost. There could be other factors that we don't know, and I know that they also get compensated when they have a lost crop. So then government is actually not creating an incentive for them to change their practice if you're going to compensate them for the losses of their crops.
Great. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, Darren, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this too. You started to mention some of your concerns before, so please continue.
Yeah, I was referring to the withholding of information during our consultation process. And to me, that's really serious because our rights to be consulted are based on the Constitution and decisions by the Supreme Court of Canada. So these senior DFO bureaucrats withholding information about pathogens and the impacts of those pathogens on the reduction of the sockeye, chinook, coho, chum, and even the pinks, if you take a look at what happened in Broughton. I mean, it says on here that 87.9% of the sockeye smokes were impacted by these pathogens. And then you have, if they're withholding this during our consultation process just a few months ago, that's not a consultation process. There should be consequences for those senior DFO bureaucrats. They even withheld it from the minister, from the sounds of it, until the last few minutes before she made her decision. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is what pushed her to that decision, because these bureaucrats were withholding the information. The lady that was sitting on our consultation process, Alison Webb, she resigned soon after that consultation process, that decision was made. So this is really serious. I think for the last 20, 30 years, we've been consulting with the promoters of fish farms. We have not consulted with the regulators. The problems with the sea lice were largely ignored. They didn't even, when we were consulting, they were looking at what was inside the pens. They didn't look at what was outside the pens. So that's the passing smolts and the fry. So the DFO science was focused inward, not on what was happening to the salmon that were going by. And that was quite surprising to us when we were doing that consultation process. And if it hadn't been for Alexandra Morton's study on sea lice and the impacts, there would be nothing from DFO. And DFO is, I think, very guilty in this whole process.
Yeah, Darren, I'd like to just stay with you for a moment, because you were part of the negotiations recently, and just so people have a little bit of background, the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans, Bernadette Jordan, in December last year, 2020, canceled DFO fish farm licenses for 19 Discovery Island open net fish farms at the request of 7 local First Nations, including yourself and Hamalco. The 3 fish farm companies that own these farms are supported by 4 North Vancouver Island mayors and city councils, including here in Campbell River, and have collectively argued that they were not consulted before this decision was made. They further state that they're concerned about the loss of 1,500 jobs and are demanding a judicial inquiry into this decision. So that's just a little bit of background. Just continue on for a little bit about this idea of consultation, unemployment, and judicial inquiry as related to Bernadette Jordan's decision.
Well, I was very disappointed in the unanimous decision by the Campbell River City Council that they would support fish farms. To me, that reminded me of a book I read called Clearing the Plains. In that book, after all the buffalo were killed, the First Nations on the plains were starving. So the Indian agent wanted to move them to Lake Winnipeg, where there was salmon available in Lake Winnipeg. And John A. MacDonald said, no, that's for the commercial fishermen. So here, just replace the buffalo with the salmon. We're wiping out wild salmon so the fish farmers can have a job. And the mayor talked about being disposable. Those starving First Nations on the plains were disposable. My culture is disposable. Our food source is disposable. So I thought that was very racist on their part. All the mayors that were taking part in this really couldn't give a damn about our culture, our people, our contribution to this country. It was very disappointing. I thought I had friends there, but apparently I don't.
You certainly have a lot of friends and support in the community in Campbell River. I can attest to that. Scott, do you have anything you want to add about that decision and the support locally?
Well, I don't think anybody gets any pleasure out of hearing anybody losing their job. I mean, I think that it's a sad state that we've gotten to this stage. On fish farms, they're right. If you were to sort of eliminate all the fish farms on the coast, you'd probably lose 1,500 or 2,000 jobs. I don't necessarily agree that if you close 19 farms that you're losing 1,500 jobs. I think that that's probably a high number. What we need to realize is that prior to fish farming, we had probably 60,000 wild fish jobs, and the Vancouver Island was a very robust economy based on wild salmon and wild salmon and the wild salmon resource. So one thing that I noticed when I was at the Cohen Inquiry was they were spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on trying to get aquaculture up and running and supporting it. If we spent that money instead on building closed containment, even building them for these large corporations that probably could do it themselves, but if we built them for them and they shifted from open net fish farms to closed containment, you wouldn't lose those jobs. The rest of the world is already moving on to closed containment. So why not move to closed containment, save those jobs, allow the wild salmon populations to come back, and you would have all those other jobs that we used to have.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're moving towards a kind of solution-based thinking here, which I want to just briefly discuss as we start to close up. But Richard, do you want to comment anything about the kind of local support from City Council, or do you want to just move into where you feel we should be going, or what should we be doing?
No, I think Darren and Scott answered those questions fairly well. I just would add that when Cortes Currents media looked into the minutes of the Strathcona Regional District and the Campbell River City Council, they read into the minutes exclusively submissions from the fish farms and none from First Nations or wild salmon defenders or scientists critical of fish farms. And I think that all levels of government should be actively supporting and encouraging the creation of more greener and sustainable jobs anyways. In terms of solutions, for a start, the fish farms, I think they continue to falsely insist that land-based closed containment fish farms are not viable for, financial or economic reasons. But there is one large land-based containment land-based closed containment fish farm in Norway being constructed right now. In Port McNeill, the Namjas Nation has a closed containment fish farm in operation. And the closed containment fish farms are able to filter and recirculate the water in their systems, unlike the semi-closed and closed containment fish farms, which are being, there's trials going on now with those, because the contaminated water is circulated back into the ocean. And fish farms located far offshore are not much of an improvement either because of extreme weather conditions, and construction costs will be pretty high. So, I think the facts about closed containment, that you can look at Alexander Morton's website and other, David Suzuki, Wild First, Watershed Sentinel, lots of media and magazines that you can verify these facts.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Richard. Darren, I'll just give you the last word on that. What do you think we should be doing, or is there a kind of solution to this situation?
I think one of the things Ed John says about the treatment of First Nations is that there's shifting between Liberal governments, Conservative governments nationally, is that the conditions stay the same. And that's because the bureaucrats are still the same. And from this letter that Alexandra Morton wrote to the DFO bureaucrats, that they have kept this business as usual approach to fish farms. And that's what has caused the decline of our salmon stocks. And I think there needs to be First Nations involvement, give our consultation process more meat, more authority. Because if we leave it up to the DFO bureaucrats, it's going to be gone. And I think for us, we're looking at, we're having a roundtable soon. We're going to look at ways we can rebuild the salmon stocks, rebuild the habitat, look at the kelp beds, look at the eelgrass, all these different areas that we need to put the habitat back for the salmon so that they have a chance. And getting the fish farms out of the way is probably the best chance we can give them. I think First Nations are, with the Declaration, United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, we have to respect that. And I've always said the best protection of the environment is our Aboriginal rights. That's got the constitutional protection. And that's where I'm disappointed with this DFO bureaucrats, is that they have diminished their constitutional obligations by misleading the public, misleading the DFO minister, and withholding information from our consultation processes. I'd say it's very serious, because that's not consultation. I think First Nations need to have more co-management of the resources within our territories, because our cultures depend on it. We have to pass on the teachings to our younger generation. We can't pass on teachings about farmed salmon.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, roundtable discussion is certainly going to be interesting. Scott, just last word, anything to add?
If I could, the film ended with the idea that aquaculture and open net fish farming is having an impact on climate change. And I remember when I first presented that at a few screenings, some scientists stood up and challenged me on that. And then they came back later and said, I think you're onto something. I'm currently working on another project that's looking at aquaculture worldwide and the impact it's having on climate change. And my theory is that because wild fish populations have dropped so much around the world, that it's allowing the zooplankton to overgraze phytoplankton, and that is causing carbon to leak out of the ocean at levels we've never seen before. And my early estimates are suggesting that aquaculture may be as much of a problem for climate change as the fossil fuel, as the burning of fossil fuels. And when you think about 38,000 billion tons of carbon in the ocean leaking out into the atmosphere, and what was stopping it before was a vibrant and functional life layer that's in the top 100 meters of every ocean, it is a very, very important and serious issue. So I think that it goes well beyond our concern about salmon and how the salmon are doing. We really need to look at it as part of the carbon cycle and part of the problem with climate change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. And I just want to reiterate again, thank you to Richard Hagensen, Chair of the Council of Canadians, Campbell River Chapter, First Nations elected Chief Darren Blaney, and Scott Renyard, the founder of the Green Channel and the filmmaker for the Pristine Coast film. Thank you for being here today, gentlemen. Obviously a subject that we could go on about, but our time is up. My name's Ken Blackburn, and thank you for watching Upfront.